The year was 1964. In a courtroom in Pretoria, a black man in an elegant suit was telling the white judges that he was prepared to die. He had admitted to sabotage. The government wanted to hang him. He spoke for 4 hours, explaining why he had to build bombs. The judges retreated to deliberate. They would not hang him. They would do something even worse. They would find a way to make him disappear completely. Tonight, we will unravel the life of Nelson Mandela, the man who spent 27 years in prison and emerged to lead the very nation that had imprisoned him. He entered as a saboteur and emerged as a saint. But the road connecting those 2 points is much stranger and more arduous than the legends often told. How did it happen? How did the son of a chief from a remote village become the most famous prisoner on earth? And how did a man who once planned bombings become a symbol of reconciliation, shaking hands with the very people who had locked him behind bars? Before we begin, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps others discover these historical journeys. And let us know in the comments which topics you would like us to explore next. In tonight's episode, we will trace the footsteps of a boy named Rolilala, meaning troublemaker, who grew up to become the man the world calls the father of the nation. We will walk with him from the green hills of Transkei to the lime quarries of Robben Island, from the sabotage headquarters at Rivonia to the presidential palace in Pretoria. On that journey, we will meet the women he loved and hurt, the comrades he led and sometimes disappointed, and the enemies he slowly, persistently turned into partners. And of course, in this journey, you will embody Nelson Mandela yourself to gain the most authentic sense of the character's life full of ups and downs. Let your breath slow down. Relax your body and join us as we return to the sunny and windy land of South Africa, where this great journey begins. You open your eyes and find yourself standing in the heart of the Mvezo Valley, where the Mbashe River flows sluggishly, winding like a gray silk ribbon, hugging the lush green hills of the Transkei. The July sky of 1918 is high and crystal clear, bringing with it the South African winter chill that seeps through your thin shirt. You feel the smell of damp earth, burnt grass, and the rustling of trees in the wind. This is where it all began, where you were given the name Rolila. You take a deep breath, feeling the pure air of the highlands. Rolilala. In the Xhosa language of your ancestors, it means pulling the branch of a tree. But more profoundly, people call it troublemaker. You reach out your small hand to touch the thin branches by the river, wondering if destiny truly lies within a name. Your father, Gadla Henry Memphakanyiswa, is standing there, a man of imposing stature, sharp eyes, and the demeanor of a chief of the royal Thembu lineage. He is an advisor to the king, a keeper of the tribe's ancient values, but in your eyes right now, he is simply a great sheltering tree. Yet, that peace does not last forever. You witness a fateful afternoon when your father's pride faces the power of the colonial government. Over a minor dispute about an ox, your father chose to stand tall. He refused to obey a white magistrate. proud rebelliousness. Those words would echo throughout your life. You see your father lose everything: his title, his land, his livestock, in just a blink of history. Your family leaves Mvezo, walking to the smaller village of Kunu, where you begin to learn how to live with poverty, but filled with freedom. At Kunu, you live in round huts called rondavels, with thatched roofs smelling of straw. Night after night, you lie on a grass mat, listening to the crickets chirping outside the mud walls. You are a herd boy, barefoot, running on flat stones, sun-tanned hands clutching a fighting stick. You learn to observe nature, to understand the language of the cattle, and to love the Xhosa customs as much as the blood flowing in your veins. Then one day, your mother, Nosekeni Fanny, dresses you in new clothes. She leads you to the Methodist primary school. In the small room smelling of ink and white chalk, Miss Medingane looks at you and smiles. From now on, your name is Nelson. You repeat that name in your mind. Nelson, a strange English name, a mark of colonial education whose full weight you could not yet understand. Why this particular name, I have no idea. You only know that from that moment, you begin to carry two opposing identities. When you were 9 years old, a dark silence fell over Kunu. Your father passed away after a long illness. You did not sob, but you felt cut adrift, a small boat losing its anchor in the vast ocean. Your mother takes your hand, leading you for miles to Mkukezweni, to the great place, the residence of the regent Jongintaba Dalindiebo. Here, you enter a new world, a strange blend of tribal tradition and Western influence. You see the regent driving a shiny Ford 58 on the trails, but at night, he sits around the fire to listen to the people's voices. You huddle in the dark corner of tribal meetings, observing how he governs. This was democracy in its purest form. You learned that a true leader is one who listens, never interrupts, and only speaks when everyone has been understood. Stories of Africa's golden age before the colonizers arrived, of brotherhood and sharing, begin to sink into your mind like seeds waiting for their day to bloom. Time passes like water under a bridge. When you were 16, the Ulwaluko initiation ceremony arrived. You stand among boys your age on the cold riverbank. A sharp pain like fire was shooting through my veins as the blade cuts through the flesh. You bite your lip, not letting a single groan escape. Ndiindoda! I am a man, you shout into the forest. Yet, in that proud moment, the words of Chief Melagili cast a cold shadow over your soul. We are a conquered people. He said that even if you are a man in the tribe, you are still a slave on your own land. Those words were like a splinter, driven deep into your heart, turning your joy of manhood into sudden restlessness. You continue your journey as a future gentleman at Clarkbury and Heeltown. You learn to tie a tie, to walk with dignity, and how to strike blows in dramatic boxing matches. You once jumped on a dining table to lecture your friends on proper etiquette, a naive pride of youth, but also a sign of a will that refused to accept mediocrity. Fort Hare University emerges like a cathedral of knowledge, the Oxford of Africa. You stroll beneath the trees on campus, talking with Oliver Tambo about law, about literature, about a future where you would be a diligent court interpreter. You play Abraham Lincoln on the stage, learning to pronounce every English word with precision. Yet, the rebellion in the Rolila blood rose again. When students went on strike for their rights, you chose to stand with them. You refused a seat on the student council even though it meant expulsion. You chose principle over safety. You returned to Mokekezweni, to the regent's disappointment, and then an arranged marriage is presented like an unavoidable destiny. You see Justice, the regent's son, just as trapped as you. That night, under the dim moon of the Transkei, you and Justice make a daring decision. You secretly lead 2 of the regent's oxen out of the kraal, sell them for money, and silently depart into the darkness. You board the night train, feeling the rattle of the carriages and the train whistle piercing the silent night. The green hills of Transkei fade away behind the window. Ahead is Johannesburg, the lights of the city of gold and the storms that await. The train whistle screeched, tearing through the morning mist, and you stepped onto the platform of Park Station. Around you was a bustling crowd, the sound of shoes pounding on granite and the heavy scent of coal smoke mingling with the cold highland air. Welcome to Johannesburg. They call this place Egoli, the city of gold. But beneath your feet, the dry industrial dust seems to hold no glint of wealth. You stand there, a young man with broad shoulders and the bearing of a Transkei noble, but in your pocket are only a few spare coins from selling the regent's 2 oxen. A reckless act of personal defiance to escape an arranged marriage. You feel the weight of this new freedom. It is as light as the clouds, yet as heavy as a block of forged steel. You venture into the crowded streets, seeking a place within the heart of this industrial beast that never stops roaring. Your first job comes to you in the form of a wooden knob carry. You become a night watchman at the Crown Mines. The Johannesburg night is deep and piercingly cold. You walk along the barbed wire fences, the steady rhythm of your own footsteps, the only sound breaking the silence of the compounds. You peer through the narrow windows. Inside are thousands of miners huddled on gray concrete bunk beds. They live far from their families, far from the green fields, only to dig up gold they will never touch. You feel a simmering humiliation in your chest. A son of the Thembu royalty, who once watched elders discuss justice under the open sky, now guarding other people's gold in the miserable darkness. First sight of South African capitalism in action. That thought flickers as you tighten your grip on the club, with hands trembling from the cold. But then, a telegram from home strikes like a bucket of cold water. The regent has found you. You are fired, pushed to the curb as the sun rises, penniless. A wanderer in the city of broken dreams, you drift to Alexandra, a place the residents still call by that haunting name, Dark City. You walk on rugged red dirt roads where the government has never allowed electric light to reach. You rent a tiny room in a cramped backyard. Night after night, you lie on the hard floor, listening to the wind whistling through the door cracks and the smell of paraffin smoke from flickering lamps. A home where I did not have a house. You tell yourself as your stomach growls with hunger. You learn to share a crust of dry bread with neighbors as destitute as yourself, feeling the warmth of human kindness in the middle of a soulless metropolis. And then, destiny leads you to the office of Walter Sisulu. You step into a room smelling of old paper and printer's ink. Sisulu looks at you, his eyes brightening behind his spectacles. He sees something in you that you haven't yet recognized. Great qualities, and immense potential. He struck me at once to be the type of a man I had been looking for, Sisulu says, his tone calm, yet filled with conviction. He doesn't just give you a job, he gives you a path. Through his patronage, you become a clerk at the law firm of Witkin, Sidelsky, and Eidelman. Every morning, you straighten your tie and put on the dignity of a black intellectual. But reality at the office is a labyrinth of invisible barriers. You remember the condescending smile of the white typist when she said, "Look, Nelson, we have no color bar here." Yet moments later, she reminded you to only use the teacup designated for black people. Discrimination is not always in a fist. Sometimes it is in a segregated teacup. However, amidst those dark spaces, there are glimmers of light. You meet Nat Bregman, a white colleague from the Communist Party. He shares his sandwiches with you, invites you to parties where black and white people sit at the same table. Those experiences begin to crack open the conservative shell of your thoughts. You realize that the enemy is not a skin color, but the system that chains us all. You bury your head in law books at the University of the Witwatersrand. You are the only black student in the cold lecture halls. You feel the icy stares of professors who bluntly declare that Africans are never suited for the legal profession. But instead of collapsing, you forge your patience upon the pages of Roman Dutch law. You make friends with free spirits like Joe Slovo and Ruth First, people who will walk through the coming storms with you. Political ideology begins to burn within you like a small fire in dry grass. You meet Anton Lembede, a man with the fierce belief that black people must liberate themselves. You absorb his Africanist philosophy with all the fervor of youth. There are times when you are too hot-headed. You storm into Communist Party meetings and pull speakers down because you believe foreign ideas are diluting your nation's struggle. You are like a young lion learning how to roar. On an Easter afternoon in 1944, at the Bantu Men's Social Center, you along with Walter Sisulu and Oliver Tam, laid the first bricks for the ANC Youth League. You call yourselves the Young Lions. You do not want polite petitions, you want action. You want to turn the ANC into a tsunami of the masses, rather than a club for conservative gentlemen. Amidst those political gales, life grants you a peaceful harbor. At Walter's house, you meet Evelyn Mace, a nurse with kind eyes and gentle hands. Love comes as fast as a tropical rain shower. You marry her in a simple ceremony. No party, no luxury. You lead each other to the house at 8115 Orlando West in Soweto, a tiny brick house with a zinc roof and a cold cement floor. Every morning you still carry plastic buckets to fetch water from the public tap. You feel the cold of the water seeping through your skin as you prepare for a long workday. You hold your firstborn son, Thembi, in your arms, feeling his soft breath in the darkness of Orlando. But life also takes away something priceless. Your little daughter, Makaziwe, passed away at only 9 months old. You stand frozen before the small grave, feeling your heart tighten. A wordless pain, but it makes your will sharper and colder than ever before. By 1947, you are no longer the boy who fled from Transkei. You are a key member of the ANC in the Transvaal. You learn to be tough, forcing weak leaders to resign. You learn to sacrifice personal comforts, living on loans to finish your studies. You realize that the road ahead is no longer Nelson's road, but the road of a suffering nation. You step out of the door of House 8115, your leather shoes worn thin, but your footsteps are incredibly firm. The darkness of Soweto is slowly giving way to the faint dawn of a new era. You hear the wind whistling over the zinc roofs, carrying the breath of the protests to come. An indescribable restlessness manifests in your chest as you look toward the horizon, which is turning a burning red. You stand on the sidewalk of Commissioner Street, feeling a cold wind blowing from the south, carrying the dry breath of the winter of 1948. A change is palpable in the air, not just the weather, but a dark transformation of an entire nation. This morning's newspapers are filled with images of D.F. Malin and the National Party. Their victory was not just an election, it was the beginning of an era named apartheid. An Afrikaans word that sounds short and sharp, yet carries the weight of separation, apartness. You walk through familiar streets, but today, everything suddenly feels alien. Whites-only signs begin to appear on park benches, at post offices, and even on the steps of public buildings. You see black workers passing by with bowed heads, their eyes containing a resigned sadness. This system does not only want to separate living spaces, it wants to separate human dignity. The Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act, the Group Areas Act. Cold legal documents are gradually tightening the noose, turning the true owners of this land into strangers in their own home. In the smoke-filled enclosed meeting rooms of the ANC, you feel your chest ready to burst. The patience of your youth has run dry. You look at the elders still drafting polite petitions, gentle pleas sent to a government that has already closed its heart. You, along with Walter Sisulu and Oliver Tambo, decide that the era of endurance has ended. At the 1949 conference, the voice of the young lions rang out clearly. A program of action was passed. No longer pleas, but strikes, boycotts, and a proud non-cooperation. You feel a surge of electricity down your spine as you realize that from now on, the ANC has truly become a fighting mass movement. Yet, your thoughts at this time are like a dammed river. You still believe in the purity of African nationalism. There are two bulls in this kraal, a black bull and a white bull. The black bull must rule. That declaration of yours carried pride, but also deep prejudice. Until the 1st of May, 1950, under the pale sun of May Day, you watch from afar the strike of the communists. And then, gunshots ring out. You see the smoke clear to reveal the bodies of 18 people lying on the cold ground. Their blood has no skin color. It has only the one red color of sacrifice. Witnessing the indiscriminate brutality of the police and the way comrades of different races gripped each other's hands in hardship, the shell of prejudice within you begins to crack. Oliver Tambo's words echo in your mind like a prophecy. Today it is our Communist Party too. Tomorrow it will be our trade unions. Then our African National Congress. You begin to understand that to defeat a giant system, you need arms larger than a single skin color. In 1952, you stand before the mirror, straightening your tie and taking on the responsibility of National Volunteer-in-Chief. The Defiance campaign begins. You travel across the country, from brightly lit cities to dark slums, recruiting fearless souls. You see thousands of people entering whites-only passages, sitting on forbidden benches with a calm smile on their lips. They accept arrest. They fill the prisons with their dignity. In Durban, standing before 10,000 people burning with spirit, you feel the power of multiracial unity for the first time in history. Though you are arrested immediately after, sentenced to 9 months of suspended imprisonment, and served with banning orders, you know the fire has been lit. The ANC has grown 10 times stronger, and the name Nelson Mandela has become an obsession for the Pretoria government. Amidst those political storms, you find a shelter for your ideals. Together with Oliver, you open the law firm Mandela and Tambo. It is a small office, but the only fortress for desperate black people. You sit behind the wooden desk, listening to stories of injustice. Farmers stripped of their land, fathers beaten for forgetting their passes. The smell of old paper mingles with the weary sweat of clients. You enter the courtroom with the demeanor of a warrior, facing white judges with the confidence of one who holds justice. Each case is a battle, each defense a manifesto for human rights. As banning orders tighten, you realize you cannot forever fight in the light. The M Plan is born during sleepless nights spent over pages of paper. You break the organization into silent cells, like underground veins of blood. You repeat Nehru's words to remind yourself and your comrades, "No easy walk to freedom." Your footsteps must now become lighter, more secret, but the goal has never been clearer. In the summer of 1955, at Kliptown, a song of freedom is raised. The Congress of the People. You cannot appear publicly because of the ban, so you choose to disguise yourself as an ordinary laborer. You stand on the edge of the crowd, your hat pulled down to hide your face, silently watching thousands of people passing the Freedom Charter together. South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. That declaration rings out through the vast space like a resolution for all hatred. You smile in the darkness, feeling a strange serenity, seeing your dream being lit by thousands of people. But as the light of ideals is brightest, the shadow in your private life descends. You return to the house in Orlando, but Evelyn's laughter no longer greets you. Constant absence, invisible pressures, and the vast difference in beliefs have dug a deep trench between the two of you. Evelyn chooses faith in God, while you choose faith in the revolution. You see the empty house, the furniture gone, only a terrifying silence remains. You feel a bone-chilling loneliness, a price you never anticipated paying. You stand still in the middle of the living room, the sunset from the small window stretching across the cold cement floor. You reach out to gently touch the wall, feeling the peeling paint. A chapter of life is closing in silence. You put on your long wool coat, pulling up the collar to ward off the cold seeping into your skin, and step out of the wooden door. The iron chains of the gate creak in the night as you begin to walk onto the quiet road ahead. Dawn on the 5th of December, 1956. A dry knock at the door tore through the stillness of the night in Orlando. You startle awake, feeling the coldness of the floor beneath your feet as the dark shadows of security police in long wool coats burst in. The cold handcuffs lock tightly around your wrists. You do not resist, only quietly looking at the house one last time before being pushed into the van idling outside. You are one of 156 people arrested that night. Intellectuals, minors, free spirits, all charged with the gravest crime, high treason. You find yourself standing in the drill hall in Johannesburg, inside a massive wire cage erected in haste. You feel the humiliation seeping into every fiber of your being as you are locked up like a wild animal for the white judges to observe. But inside that very iron cage, you see an indomitable spirit burning. You look over at Oliver Tambo, at the comrades of other races, and you understand that this cage cannot imprison the will of an entire nation. The trial drags on, consuming days and months of your life. Every morning, you board a separate bus to travel from Johannesburg to Pretoria. The roar of the engine over the 40-mile journey becomes a familiar rhythm of patience. In the cramped space of the bus, you and your comrades discuss the Constitution, freedom, and distant dreams amidst laughter and resistance songs. Those trips turned comradeship into a block of steel, tempered through trial. High treason, the label they pinned on you, ironically, was the greatest honor you had ever worn. Amidst those weary days in court, your life suddenly brightens with a glance. At a bus stop in Soweto, you meet Nomzamo Winifred Madikizela, Winnie. You feel a new surge of vitality seeing the resolute eyes and radiant smile of that social worker. Love blooms like a wild flower in a storm. You hurriedly buy a wedding dress for her even before officially proposing, an instinctive and romantic act of a man who does not know if he will still be free tomorrow. The wedding at Bizana takes place under the shadow of surveillance. You hold Winnie's hand, feeling the warmth from her hands, but also sensing the burden she will have to carry by choosing to walk beside a troublemaker. Police raid the wedding, an omen of the years of separation and harassment to come. Winnie does not cry. She looks at you with eyes of steel. You realize you have found a true companion, someone who loves not just Nelson, but the ideals Nelson pursues. Then, the 21st of March 1960 arrives. A day when the smell of blood and gunpowder will haunt your mind forever. In Sharpeville, the sound of rapid gunfire tears through the air. 69 people fall, their backs full of bullet wounds while trying to flee. You stand frozen at the news, feeling a deep rupture in your faith in nonviolent struggle. In an act of ultimate defiance, you take your passbook, the symbol of chains, and throw it into the blazing fire. You watch the pages curl, turning into black ash in the wind. You call on everyone to do the same. The government responds with a state of emergency. The ANC is outlawed. You are imprisoned, cut off from contact with Winnie and your children for months. The great prison walls seem to want to swallow your hope, but every time you close your eyes, you see the image of the fire burning that passbook glowing in the night. On the 29th of March 1961, a silence hangs over the courtroom in Pretoria. The judge declares, "Not guilty." You walk out of the court, taking a deep breath of the air of freedom, but you know this is only a lull before the great storm. Instead of returning home to embrace Winnie, you decide to step into the shadows. You disappear into the alleys of Johannesburg, beginning the life of a fugitive. The press calls you the Black Pimpernel. You learn to disguise yourself, sometimes as a calm black driver, sometimes as a busy chef or a gardener named David. You feel the itchy fake beard on your face, the hat pulled down to hide your eyes. You hide in safe houses, listening to the footsteps of police on patrol outside the window. Loneliness begins to seep into your skin, but you understand that you must become a ghost to keep the movement alive. On a night in Pietermaritzburg, you appear unexpectedly at the All-In African Conference. Under the dim lights, you stand before 1,400 people, your voice ringing out with authority. You demand a national convention, a new constitution. You warn that the nation's patience has run dry. But when government tanks roll into the streets to suppress the strike, you realize a bitter truth. The attacks of the wild beast cannot be averted with only bare hands. You sit alone in a safe house, surrounded by the books of Che Guevara and Mao Zedong. You reflect on violence, on sacrifice. Armed struggle is not what you wanted, but what you were forced to choose. Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation, is formed. You become the first commander-in-chief, the one holding the sword to protect the shield. The night of the 16th of December, 1961. A series of explosions ring out at power stations and government buildings. You stand from afar watching the flames rise in the night. The acts of sabotage were meticulously planned to avoid casualties, but they sent an ironclad message. The time comes in the life of any nation when there remain only two choices: submit or fight. You feel the heat of the explosion blowing against your face, a numbing yet resolute sensation. The era of prayers is dead, and the era of the spear has begun. You step into an old gray car waiting at a dark street corner. The engine starts softly, and you lean back in the seat, watching the lights of Johannesburg fade behind. The car speeds away into the darkness, toward the border, where a new and dangerous journey awaits you in foreign lands. The old car stopped at the faint boundary of the country. You stepped out, feeling the sweltering heat of the Bechuanaland afternoon against your face, carrying the scent of dry grass and dust. This was the first time at the age of 43 that you had set foot outside the borders of South Africa. You looked back, where the horizon was hazy with smoke and dust, where your brothers were groaning under shackles, and then you looked down at the fake passport in your hand. David Matsamai. That name was not just a disguise. It was a new identity, a new life you were forced to assume to find the breath of freedom for your people. You adjusted your hat, your mosquito boots thumping on the dry ground. You were no longer Nelson Mandela, the glamorous lawyer of Johannesburg. You were now a ghost, an envoy of the spear seeking recognition from the world. You crossed vast fields and rushing rivers, heading north, where the light of independence was slowly spreading across the dark continent. The first stop was Dar es Salaam. You stood on the azure coast of Tanganyika, feeling the moisture of the ocean and the intoxicating freedom in your chest. You met Julius Nyerere, the philosopher-president with brilliant eyes. You sat together, drinking tea and discussing the destiny of Africa. Nyerere believed in a pure African socialism, while you, with the books of Marx in your head, saw a grittier reality. Despite differences in ideology, when you looked into those eyes, you knew you were not alone. A travel document was handed over, and the journey of David Matsamai continued toward Ethiopia. Addis Ababa appeared with ancient palaces and the thin air of the highlands. You stood before an international conference, thousands of eyes fixed on the stranger from the south. You took a deep breath, and your voice rang out clearly, shattering invisible barriers. Arabs can also be Africans. That declaration was like a lightning bolt, binding the disjointed pieces of the continent into a unified block. You met Emperor Haile Selassie, a living symbol of resistance. Standing behind the emperor on the speaker's podium, you felt the power of history lifting your footsteps. You were no longer an individual. You were the cry of millions of shackled souls. And then, your journey became a shuttle trip through 13 countries. You were like a diplomat without a country, knocking on the doors of every capital to seek the breath of war. In Egypt, you stood frozen before the Great Pyramids, feeling the eternity of time and the smallness of tyrannical regimes. In Tunisia, when President Bourguiba handed you £5,000 to buy weapons, you felt the weight of that money. It was not paper and ink. It was hope, blood, and freedom. But perhaps the most profound lesson came from Morocco, where you met the fighters of the Algerian National Liberation Army. Men with sun-bronzed faces and fire in their eyes taught you that a revolution cannot move with two heads. They taught you about guerrilla warfare, about how to blend with the masses like fish in water. You took meticulous notes on every piece of advice, understanding that the road ahead would have no room for political naivety. You left the dark continent for foggy London. The contrast was stark as you stood in Parliament Square, surrounded by ancient Gothic architecture and the biting cold of the north. You met Oliver Tambo beneath the stone statues of British greats. Two old friends gripped each other's hands, rare smiles blooming on their lips amidst mounting worries. You looked up at the statue of a white noble and joked to Oliver, "One day, a statue of a black man will be erected here." A dream that seemed crazy in 1962, but it kindled a fierce belief in the turning of destiny. London taught you another kind of weapon, the power of media and lobbying in parliamentary corridors. You learned how to convince Western politicians that your struggle was not a racial civil war, but a fight for universal human values. In June 1962, you returned to Ethiopia, but this time, not to speak. You discarded your elegant suit, put on a khaki military uniform, and began formal military training. At 43, your body had begun to feel the fatigue of time, but your will had never been sharper. You crawled through mud, learned to assemble automatic rifles, and learned to make bombs from crude materials. The sound of gunfire rang in your ears, the acrid smell of gunpowder mingling with sweat. You were learning to be a soldier, preparing for the life and death days ahead. However, only 2 weeks of the 6-month course had passed when a telegram from Walter Sisulu arrived. Return. 2 short words, but they carried the urgency of a crisis. There were malicious rumors that you had abandoned your comrades to live comfortably abroad. You did not hesitate. You packed your belongings, bringing a small gift for Winnie brightly printed cotton fabrics from the lands you had traveled, and a semi-automatic Makarov pistol, a gift from Ethiopia. You drove through the night, across border trails, returning to Lily Sleeve Farm in Rivonia in silence. You buried the gun and the khaki uniform under a tree in the garden, as if burying a part of your warrior life to return to the role of organizer. You reported to the ANC Working Committee about a harsh reality. The world still viewed the movement with skepticism. Despite all warnings, you decided to make a reckless trip to Natal to meet Chief Albert Luthuli. You posed as a black driver for Cecil Williams, a white friend. Perhaps because you were so accustomed to hiding, you had grown careless. You attended parties. You spoke of guerrilla warfare under bright lights. The 5th of August, 1962. On the quiet R103 road leading back to Johannesburg, a police roadblock appeared ahead. You sat calmly in the driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to maintain the composure of a diligent driver. But when you saw Sergeant Vorster approach, you knew the game of hide-and-seek was over. You tried to hide the gun in the seat gap, but it was too late. You stepped out of the car, standing tall under the sun of the natal sky. "I am Nelson Mandela," you declared with all the dignity of a man who had traveled 10,000 miles to find freedom. The handcuffs locked around your wrists once more, but this time their cold sensation carried a completely different weight. You had no idea that behind this arrest lay the shadow of the CIA, the political calculations of the Cold War. You only knew that from this moment, your sky would be reduced to what you could see through iron bars. They took you to Pietermaritzburg prison. The sound of the iron door slamming shut was heavy, echoing through the empty hallway. You were stripped of your driver's uniform and dressed in coarse prisoner's clothes. You sat down on the straw mat in the corner of the cell, listening to the footsteps of the guards fading away. Darkness flooded in, but in your mind, the green hills of Transkei, the pyramids of Egypt, and Winnie's eyes still appeared vividly. You closed your eyes, feeling the absolute silence of a journey that had just ended, to prepare for another battle. A long battle of 27 years, in the silence. You are sitting in the cramped cell of Pretoria Prison, listening to the steady footsteps of the guards echoing through the stone corridors. The weak sunlight of a July afternoon in 1963 filters through a tiny window high on the wall, casting faint streaks of light onto the cement floor. You do not yet know that not far away, at Lilliesleaf Farm in Rivonia, a dry cleaning van is slowly driving down the dusty road. It carries no clean clothes, but a cruel destiny. Fierce dog barks tear through the peaceful suburban air. You close your eyes, and by a strange premonition, you see your closest comrades, Walter Sisulu, Govan Beki, Ahmed Kathrada, being herded into a corner at gunpoint by the police. All the plans for Operation Maibui, the blueprints for the guerrilla struggle, and even the diary of your journey across Africa that you so cherished, all have fallen into the hands of the enemy. A perfect net has been cast, and you, despite being in prison, suddenly become accused no. 1. In a legal drama whose intended is the gallows, you enter the courtroom at the Pretoria Supreme Court with a demeanor that makes the entire room hold its breath. Today, you are not wearing tattered prisoner clothes. Draped over your shoulders is the traditional kaross, the leopard skin cloak of the Thembu people. The coarse animal hide, carrying the warmth of your ancestors, is a wordless manifesto of your royal origins and a rejection of the authority of a white court trying to impose its laws on Africans. You stand tall, eyes burning, looking directly at Prosecutor Percy Utar as he screams, calling you cowardly traitors wanting to drench the country in blood. In the days that followed, you replaced the cloak with the elegant suit of a lawyer, but beneath the fabric, you still felt the humiliation of the prisoner shorts and crude sandals. That contrast was like a cut in the soul, reminding you that you stood on the boundary between a free intellectual and a shackled slave. You and your legal team, led by Bram Fisher, made a daring decision. You would not plead for mercy. You would transform this courtroom into a cathedral of ideals. The oppressed is often left no recourse but to use methods that mirror those of the oppressor. Those words rang out as a steely affirmation of what was right. During 2 weeks in the darkness of your cell, you diligently wrote every word of your fateful speech. You knew these might be the last words you would ever say to the world before the shadow of the gallows fell, the 20th of April, 1964. An absolute silence covers Pretoria. You stand up from the dock, holding pages with frayed edges in your hand. Your voice is calm, echoing throughout the courtroom for 4 hours. You speak of the extreme poverty of black people, of children who cannot go to school, of fathers stripped of their dignity. You admit to being a man who held a gun, but not out of a desire for violence, but because the silence of peace had been crushed by ammunition. Finally, you set the pages down, lowering your voice, but every word uttered is as heavy as 1,000 pounds. You look directly into the eyes of Judge Quartus DeWitt, ignoring all fear of approaching death. During my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to this struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. You sit down. An absolute silence follows. 30 seconds pass like centuries. The silence lasted perhaps 30 seconds, Boo, but it felt like minutes. You hear Winnie's muffled sobs from behind, hear the wind whistling through the high window slits. In that moment, the entire world seemed to stop to contemplate the power of a soul that could not be broken. On the 12th of June, 1964, you stand there to receive the final verdict. The judge declares life imprisonment, no death sentence. A sigh of relief like a wave surges through the courtroom. You smile, giving a thumbs up to Winnie, who is looking at you with tearful but proud eyes. You have won the battle for your lives, but the price is to be buried alive in prison. That very night, darkness enveloped Pretoria as you were awakened by the jingle of keys. They gave you a piece of dry bread and a bottle of soda, then shoved you into a closed van. You felt the vehicle shake violently as it headed toward the military airport. You were placed into a cold metal tube, the plane that would take you into the void. The lights of Pretoria faded as the plane door slammed shut, leaving only the deafening roar of the engines. The flight landed before dawn could break. You found yourself in the hold of a wooden ferry, the Atlantic waves hitting the side of the boat in dry thuds. The smell of salty seawater mingled with the heavy scent of engine oil. The wardens stood on the deck, their faces full of animosity, and began to urinate down through the iron grates onto the heads of you and your comrades. You grit your teeth, maintaining your final composure. When the ferry docked at Robben Island, a barren limestone island in the middle of the sea, the first welcome you heard was, "This is the island. Here you will die." Under the sweeping beams of searchlights, you were forced to strip naked in the bone-chilling sea wind. Your clothes were thrown into a bin of disinfectant, smelling pungently acrid. Standing there, naked and soaking wet under the whistling wind, you saw a warden raise his hand to strike another prisoner. Without a moment's hesitation, you stepped forward, your sharp eyes looking directly at him. You declared that you would sue him in court if he dared touch anyone. The warden froze, his aggression suddenly vanishing before the authority radiating from a man who had nothing left but his dignity. You put on the coarse prisoner clothes, feeling the fabric as stiff as sandpaper against your skin. You followed the guard deep into the narrow corridors of Section B. The sound of shoes pounding on the stone floor sounded dry and lonely. The iron door of cell 466/64 opened. You stepped inside, feeling the cold of the limestone walls surrounding you. The iron door slammed shut heavily, the lock turning with a dry click. You sat down on the straw mat, looking up at the tiny window, just enough to see a patch of the dark sky. A new journey, long and silent, officially began in the darkness of the lonely island. You stand still in cell 466/64, thin hands touching the coarse, cold limestone wall, a space only about 2.4 meters by 2.1 meters. You take a deep breath, feeling the smell of mold, the pungent scent of disinfectant, and the loneliness seeping through your skin. In your late 40s, A tall man like you cannot lie straight on this concrete floor without bending your knees. The iron bucket in the corner emits the distinct, sharp stench of prison. The sound of the warden's keys jangling from the far corridor reminds you that every moment here is a battle for dignity. The first night on Robben Island, you lie on a thin grass mat covered by 3 thin blankets, not enough to stop the freezing sea cold from seeping through the door cracks. The cruel welcome of the warden still echoes in your ears like a curse. This is the island. Here you will die. But looking up at the tiny patch of night sky through the small window, you know your heart still beats to the rhythm of freedom, and this darkness cannot swallow the hope of a nation. The next morning, the humiliation begins with what you wear. While Indian or colored prisoners were given long pants, they handed you a pair of shorts meant for primary school boys. You hold that short piece of fabric in your hand, feeling the cheapness the apartheid regime reserved for black men. They wanted to turn you into a child, to strip away your maturity and authority. You stand silently, not wearing it. You firmly refuse until the government relents. But even when they give you long pants, you still shake your head. You say you will not wear them until every other black brother in the cell block is also issued long pants. Dignity is not something to be received individually. It is a unified block of all those in chains. Then January 1965 arrives, bringing long, grueling days at the lime quarry. You walk in the line of prisoners, feet pounding on the crunching gravel. Under the scorching South African sun, the quarry appears brilliant white, blinding like a snowy desert. You lift the heavy pickaxe, arms trembling from malnutrition, but your eyes do not blink. The light reflecting from the limestone strikes back, piercing your retinas. Stone dust as fine as powder rises, clinging to your lungs, your throat, making every breath painful. Year after year, you ask for a pair of sunglasses to protect your fading eyes, but the answer is always a cold shake of the head. Your tear ducts are permanently damaged. You can no longer cry with tears, but the pain just sinks deeper inside. Your food ration is a bowl of thin maize porridge, a little coffee made from burnt maize. You chew pieces of meat that are only gristle and fat slowly, as if digesting the very bitterness of your life. To resist the warden's efforts to exhaust you, you teach your comrades the go slow tactic. Every time a warden screams, "Hauk," as if herding cattle, you lift your pickaxe as leisurely as possible. You bring the pickaxe down with a strange calmness. You transform forced labor into a ritual of defiance. You want to show them that they can control your body, but the rhythm of your soul is something they can never touch. In the darkness of hell on earth, you and comrades like Walter Sisulu and Govan Mbeki silently built a cathedral of knowledge. The University of Robben Island was born amidst the warden's shouting. During rare breaks, sitting on the dusty stone ground, you whisper to the youth about the history of the ANC, about great Thembu kings, about the philosophy of freedom. You build a communication network as sophisticated as underground veins. Tiny slips of paper with microscopic writing were hidden in hollow toilet paper rolls, in worn matchboxes. News of the outside world, of the resistance movement, still silently flowed through the cells, warming cold hearts. In 1975, in the absolute silence of late night, you began writing your memoirs. You wrote on thin slips of paper, hands numb from the cold, but mind glowing with memories of Kunu, of Johannesburg. Mac Maharaj and Lalu Chiba helped you transcribe them into characters as tiny as ant tracks, hiding them in the covers of old photo albums to smuggle out. You buried the original in the prison garden, carefully wrapped in plastic cocoa containers, hoping the motherland would protect these truths. But then one afternoon, the dry sound of a warden's shovel digging into the earth rang out exactly where you hid that treasure. You stood watching them dig up your heart's work, feeling a sorrow as sharp as losing a part of your flesh. The punishment was a 4-year deprivation of study rights, but your will was something no wall could stop. However, prison punishments are never as painful as the stabs of fate. In 1968, news of your mother's death reached you like a poisonous wind. You stood frozen before the warden, hands clenched as the application to attend the funeral was rejected. And then, a year later, the greatest tragedy struck. Thembi, your beloved eldest son, was gone in a car accident. Walter Sisulu recalled that night you returned to your cell and stood motionless by the window for over a dozen hours. You looked out at the vast darkness of the sea, where waves crashed against the cliffs like the wailing of a father who could not be by his son's side at the end. You did not sleep, did not eat, your whole body like stone. The silence was heavier than any sentence. You realized the price of freedom is the sacrifice of what is most sacred. You could not send off your mother, could not bury your son. You could only send your feelings into the sea breeze, hoping they would carry your warmth to the distant graves back home. After the 1976 Soweto uprising, Robben Island received a new wave of prisoners. Young, angry men carrying the ideology of the Black consciousness movement. They entered prison with disdain for your generation. They called you coolie lovers, claiming your moderation was a failure. You listened to those insults with the infinite patience of an elder brother. Instead of arguing, you invited them to discuss. You listened to their rages, and gradually, with the calmness of an intellect forged in fire, you showed them that this struggle needed more than anger. You and Serene Moodley, a radical youth, watched the film The Wild One during a rare prison screening. You pointed out to him that the rebellion of youth only truly has power when illuminated by a lasting ideal. Slowly, one by one, those hot heads began to bow in respect before your silent greatness. You realized that to defeat the enemy, you must understand their language. You began to learn Afrikaans, the language of those who were oppressing you. You read about the history of the Afrikaner, understanding their fears and pride. When you greeted a warden in his mother tongue, asking about his wife and children's health, you shattered the barrier of hatred. Young warden Christo Brand looked at you with unconcealed admiration. Once, when Winnie visited with a newborn grandchild you had never seen, Christo did the unthinkable. He secretly hid the baby inside his long coat and brought it close to the glass partition so you could see that tiny life. You saw the wide eyes of the grandchild, feeling a wave of warmth down your spine. You could not touch the baby, but in that moment, you knew kindness still existed even in the den of cruelty. You turned your keepers into people who respected you, turning yourself from a captive into a holder of absolute moral power. In 1980, a new wave swept the world. The slogan, "Free Mandela," appeared on streets from London to New York. You became a global symbol of freedom, a name chanted by millions. The South African government began to fear. They made offers of conditional release. They wanted you to return to the Transkei, accepting a sham independence. You stood tall before the government representative, your voice firm, without a hint of hesitation. Only free men can negotiate. Prisoners cannot enter into contracts. You would rather rot in this cell than receive a freedom tainted by compromise with evil. You chose to stay, chose to be the gardener for the soul of an entire nation. By the end of the Robben Island phase, you had turned the prison yard into a vibrant garden. You cared for thousands of tomato plants, bright red peppers, and juicy watermelons. You shared those results with both prisoners and wardens. Watching the green sprouts rise from the barren land, you smiled. You had survived. You had not only kept your sanity, but also solidified your position as the supreme leader. In March 1982, a sudden change arrived. The warden ordered you to pack your bags. You left cell 466/64, walking through the stone corridors for the last time. The sound of your shoes pounded on the ground, heading toward the waiting ferry. You stepped onto the side of the boat, feeling the salt spray of the sea against your face. The limestone island faded into the misty haze, taking with it 18 years of youth and wordless pain. You looked toward the mainland, where the lights of Cape Town began to twinkle like stars. A new chapter was opening, full of intellectual negotiations and historical turning points. You sat on the edge of the boat, listening to the murmuring waves, feeling the vibration of the engine beneath your feet, and leisurely closed your eyes amidst the wind whistling through the masts. You wake to a strange sound. Not the murmuring waves hitting the cliffs of Robben Island, but a truck engine idling steadily in the morning mist. March 1982. After 18 long years, living surrounded by water, they take you away without a single word of explanation. You sit in the dark hold of the van, feeling the rumble of the paved roads on the mainland. An indescribable restlessness creeps into your chest as you realize you are leaving that harsh but brotherly university behind. The destination is Pollsmoor Prison, a gray concrete block tucked away in the Cape Town suburbs. You enter room 99, a vast but damp space. You reach out and touch the walls, feeling the cold moisture seeping through the plaster. The walls were damp. The air here is heavy, carrying a more suffocating sense of imprisonment than the salty air of the island. You begin to feel a persistent dry cough, your chest tightening with every breath. Tuberculosis is silently eating away at your body, a cruel gift from these damp walls. Yet, even in that confinement, you still find a piece of soul to nourish. You ask Brigadier Monroe for permission to create a roof garden. Create a roof garden. You kneel on the scorching concrete, hands that once crushed stones in the lime quarry, now cradling handfuls of fertile soil. You plant tomatoes, peppers, onions. You watch the green sprouts rise amidst the barbed wire fences, feeling a miraculous connection to life. Every morning, as the sun first appears over the peak of Table Mountain, you stand there among the lush leaves, smelling the damp earth and feeling a strange sense of peace. Gardening is not just about extra greens for a meal. It is a ritual of meditation, a way for you to affirm that life is always stronger than death, and that patience can make hope bloom even on stone. In the mid-1980s, the outside world begins to shake. Economic sanctions tighten around South Africa, and your name becomes a burning torch in the protests. PW.I. Botha, the man dubbed the Great Crocodile, begins to feel the heat. In January 1985, an offer of freedom is made. They want you to buy your freedom by betraying your ideals, unconditionally rejecting violence as a political weapon, You sit in your cell, listening to the echoes from the Soweto Stadium through your daughter Zinzi's account. You feel a surge of pride hearing her strong voice read her father's manifesto. What freedom am I being offered while the organization of the people remains banned? Only free men can negotiate. A prisoner cannot enter into contracts. That rejection rings out like a thunderclap, P tearing through the political sky. You realize that, although imprisoned, it is you who holds the key to the future. And then, a solitary and daring decision forms in your mind. In 1985, while lying in a hospital bed after prostate surgery, you look out the window and understand that this stalemate cannot last forever. You decide to be the first to reach out. You do not discuss it with Walter. You do not tell the comrades upstairs. You reason that there are times when a leader must move out ahead of his flock. There are times when a leader must move out ahead of his flock. A great gamble with your own honor. You know that if you fail, you will be seen as a traitor. But if you do not act, the nation's blood will continue to flow into rivers. The first meeting with Justice Minister Kobe Coetzee takes place amidst the hospital's scent of disinfectant. You do not receive him as a cowering prisoner. You stand up, smile politely, and say, "Ah, Mr. Coetzee, how nice to see you. Ah, Mr. Coetzee, how nice to see you." The grace of a Thembu prince, combined with the sharp mind of a lawyer, takes the opponent completely by surprise. You used kindness as a weapon and dignity as a shield to open the door to dialogue. Then come the secret drives. Warden James Gregory drives you around Cape Town. You sit in the back seat, looking through the glass at a world you have been away from for over 2 decades. You see luxurious suburban homes with blue swimming pools, radiant beaches with golden sun, where white people casually enjoy life, the extraordinary wealth and ease that white South Africans enjoyed. That wealth contrasts painfully with the dilapidated black slums. You feel a simmering rage, but you suppress it. You observe, you learn, and you understand that your enemies are also human beings who fear losing everything they have. You need to understand their fear to dissolve it. In December 1988, they took you to Victor Verster Prison. This time it is no longer a cold cell, but a secluded cottage with a swimming pool and a private chef. A true gilded cage. Yet, every morning when you wake up, you maintain the discipline of a warrior. Even though Jack Swart is ready to serve, you insist on washing your own dishes and smoothing the wrinkles on your bedsheets yourself. You do not allow comfort to blunt your will. You sit in the living room, conducting 47 secret meetings with government officials. The debates about the Communist Party and majority votes are tense. When they demand the ANC disarm, you look them in the eye and say, "You cannot ask one side to disarm while the other keeps its boot on their neck. You cannot ask one side to disarm while the other keeps its boot on their neck." Summer of 1989. A historic afternoon at the Twin Highs residence. You are brought to meet P.W. Botha. The prison commander wants to tie your tie for you, but you refuse. You declare that you will never meet the president in a hangman's noose. In a hangman's noose, if you do not tie it yourself. A small detail, but it is the final limit of self-respect. And then, in that luxurious room, the great crocodile personally pours tea for you. 2 men standing on opposite sides of the front line now sit together, talking about Afrikaner history and past wars. You realize that when people sit down to drink tea together, the ghosts of prejudice begin to vanish. But amidst those political victories, your heart bleeds from a pain named Winnie. Information about the Mandela United Football Club and her violent actions in Soweto begins to reach your ears. You hear about the death of Stompy Saipe, a poor 14-year-old boy. You feel a deep rupture in your soul. The woman you have always loved, the brave warrior who stood by you, now seems lost in the whirlpool of hatred. You hold an old photo of her in your hand, looking into those eyes and finding yourself in love with a memory. In love with a memory, more than the woman in reality. You try to write, try to advise, get rid of these people around you, get rid of these people around you. But in response, there is only silence or clumsy excuses. In public, you still stand up to protect her, calling her a wonderful girl. She's a wonderful girl. It is the final loyalty of a husband, but deep down, you know that something has shattered and can never be mended. In August 1989, P.W. Botha leaves the historical stage after a stroke. F.W. de Klerk steps up. You meet him in December, a meeting as cold but direct as businessmen. You see in de Klerk's eyes a pragmatism, a man who understands that the era of apartheid has come to an end. You ask for a gesture of goodwill, and de Klerk agrees. When Walter Sisulu and your Rivonia friends are released in October 1989, you stand alone in the cottage at Victor Verster. You feel a vast loneliness. Your comrades have gone ahead, while you remain the final piece on the chessboard of destiny. You walk in the garden, looking at the blooming flowers, listening to the wind whistling through the oak trees. You know that Iron Gate will soon open, but you also know that the burden on your shoulders from that moment on will be heavier than any shackles you ever wore. You sit down in the old armchair, watching the burning red sunset slowly fade behind the Paarl Mountains. The clock ticks in the silent room. You close your eyes, feeling the breath of history surging right beside you. A short nap before tomorrow comes. The day the whole world will hold its breath to see your first step on the road to freedom. You are sitting in the living room of the cottage at Victor Verster, your ears catching the ticking of the wall clock, mingling with the chilly air of a February morning in 1990. On the table, the small radio is emitting static signals before a clear voice rings out. It is F.W. de Klerk. You feel your heart beat a step faster hearing the words you have waited for throughout 27 long years. Release Mr. Mandela unconditionally. Everything comes as suddenly as a summer rain shower in the heart of the desert. You had asked to delay for a few days to mentally prepare, but history waits for no one. You stand before the mirror, straightening your tie for your slate gray suit, feeling the smooth but unfamiliar fabric against your skin. You take a deep breath, the scent of freedom beginning to seep through the door cracks. At exactly 4:14 p.m. that Sunday, the iron gates of Victor Verster open, the hinges screeching a dry cry like a farewell to the past. You step out, your feet pounding on the asphalt with a strange caution. You grip Winnie's hand, feeling the warmth from her palm, and by an instinct that has seeped into your blood and flesh, you raise your fist to the sky, a symbol of indomitability. But then, a long, black object is pointed directly at you. You startle back, a surge of electricity running down your spine, memories of assassination plots and gun barrels in the dark rising fiercely. He thought it was an assassination attempt. Only when you realize it is a long-arm microphone from a film crew do you smile bitterly. The world has changed too fast while you were locked behind bars. You are like a traveler from the previous century just stepping off a time train, bewildered by modern equipment you have never seen. The motorcade carrying you is submerged in a vast sea of people. You hear the chants of Mandela, Mandela, like a tsunami hitting the side of a boat, crushing the enthusiasm of the mob caused the car to shake violently. You look through the glass, seeing thousands of tearful faces, thousands of arms raised high. A sense of overwhelming awe occupies your mind. Standing on the balcony of Cape Town City Hall under a burning red sunset, you reach into your pocket and realize you have forgotten your reading glasses. You borrow Winnie's glasses, feeling the frames a bit tight on the bridge of your nose. Your voice rings out amidst the silent square. I stand here before you, not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people. You speak of peace, but also of struggle, for you know the enemy has not yet fully laid down their arms. That night, in an unfamiliar room, you toss and turn, unable to sleep. The cheering still echoes in your head like an unending piece of music. You insist on returning to the house at 8115 Orlando West in Soweto. You walk through the narrow wooden door, smelling the coal smoke mingled with the scent of old bricks. This is where you began, and you want this to be where you find yourself again. However, the warmth you expected has been replaced by an atmosphere of distance. You look at Winnie, the wife you worship through prison photos, and realize she has become someone else. The ghosts of violence, questionable private relationships, and the power of the Mandela United bodyguard group surround her like an invisible wall. You sit alone in the small kitchen late at night, listening to the wind whistling over the zinc roofs of Soweto, feeling a bone-chilling loneliness right in the middle of your own home. You try to protect her in court, but in your heart, you know that sacred bond has been permanently severed. In August 1990, you hold a pen in your hand, signing the Pretoria Minute, a decision that shocks your brothers in the MK. You accept the suspension of the armed struggle in exchange for a hope of peace. You look at Chris Hani, the brave warrior with fire in his eyes, and explain, "You cannot ask one side to disarm, while the other keeps its boot on their neck." You are gambling your entire reputation to prevent a bloodbath. The Codesa I negotiations emerge as a battlefield without gunshots. You sit across from de Klerk, the man who released you but is also trying to protect the final privileges of white people. When he suddenly attacks the ANC with insulting words, the Ralilala fire within you blazes up. You step onto the podium, no longer with your usual politeness. You criticize him as the head of an illegitimate, discredited minority regime. The meeting room seems to freeze. The mutual endurance between two men becomes a political game of chess, tense enough to take one's breath away. The shadow of third force violence falls like a black curtain. You stand amidst the scene of the Boipatong massacre, leather shoes covered in mud and dried blood. You hear the wailing of mothers who lost children. See the banners. "Please, Mr. Mandela, no peace. Give us weapons." You feel the weight of the world pressing down on your old shoulders. You look at de Klerk and say straight to his face, "You have blood on your hands." But then, after the Bisho massacre, you realize that if you continue to use violence to respond to violence, South Africa will be nothing but a pile of ash. You return to the negotiating table, swallowing the bitterness to save a common future. In April 1992, you stand before reporters in a stifling room. Your voice trembles slightly, but remains full of dignity as you announce the separation from Winnie. "I part with her with no recriminations. I embrace her with all the love and affection." You walk out of the press conference, feeling as though you have just cut away a part of your heart. The marriage that was once a symbol of hope has collapsed right at the threshold of glory. You return to an empty house, look at an old photo of the two of you, and quietly sigh in the darkness. The 10th of April, 1993. A bolt from the blue tears through the fragile peace. Chris Hani is assassinated. The country is like a powder keg waiting for a spark to explode. You enter the television studio, searchlights shining bright, HT, but your heart is heavy. You look into the camera lens, where millions of people are holding their breath waiting for a command, and you, a newly freed prisoner, perform the role of a de facto president. You do not call for revenge. You tell of a white Afrikaner woman who bravely brought the killer to light. A white man full of prejudice and hate came to our country, but a white woman of Afrikaner origin risked her life. Your words are like a stream of cool water extinguishing a raging fire. You saved South Africa from a racial civil war with only the power of tolerance. At the end of 1993, you stand on the podium to receive the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo. You stand next to de Klerk, both holding the gold medal, but the distance between the two is wider than an ocean. You smile for the cameras, but in your heart, you only think of the interim constitution just passed. The road to April 27 has opened. Before Election Day, you invite General Viljoen of the white right wing for tea. You pour tea for him, your demeanor calm, like an elder brother. You offer a chillingly realistic argument. We cannot stand up to you on the battlefield, LD, but you cannot win because of our numbers, and you cannot kill us all. With sincerity and determination, you neutralized the final gun barrels pointed toward the election. The 27th of April, 1994. You stand in the line of people at Olanji High School. At 76 years old, for the first time in your life, you hold a ballot in your hand. You feel the light sandpaper texture, the smell of fresh ink. You walk to the grave of John Dube, whispering to your predecessor that the mission is complete. You drop the ballot into the box, hearing a gentle thud that echoes like a bell of freedom. A 10,000-mile journey has ended at a small slit on the lid of a ballot box. And then, the 10th of May, 1994. You stand on the podium at the Union Buildings in Pretoria. The South African sky is high and clear. Beneath your feet are tens of thousands of people of every skin color, singing the new national anthem together. You take a deep breath, feeling the scent of the flowers blooming in the Union Garden. Your voice rings out, broadcast across 5 continents and 4 seas. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. You look over at de Klerk, at Thabo Mbeki, and toward the crowd. The Rainbow Nation has been born. You feel an infinite relief spread throughout your body. An old chapter has closed, and you, as the president of all the people, prepare to enter the office where your dreams were once imprisoned. You smile, a smile as radiant as the morning sun, and leisurely walk amidst the thunderous cheers toward the brilliant light of a new era. You stand by the window of the presidential residence in Pretoria, looking out at the gardens blooming under the golden sun of a new era. The scent of purple jacarandas mingles with the wind, carrying the breath of a reviving nation. You feel the weight of the suit jacket on your shoulders. It is no longer shackles, but it carries the responsibility of millions of souls expecting a miracle named the Rainbow Nation. You gently stroke your hair, now as white as frost. eyes once blurred by limestone dust, now shining with a steely faith in reconciliation. June 1995. You find yourself in the heart of the Ellis Park Stadium. The cheers of 60,000 spectators shake the ground, a fierce and passionate sound. You feel the coarse fabric of the dark green Springbok jersey on your skin, the jersey bearing the number 6 of Captain Francois Pienaar. Only a few years ago, this green was still a symbol of oppression, a black person's haunting memory of a regime that treated them like weeds. But today, you wear it as a new skin of forgiveness. As you step onto the lush green grass, a strange silence suddenly falls, followed immediately by a thunderous explosion of chants. "Nelson! Nelson!" You look at the white faces in the stands. People who once considered you enemy number one, now they are calling your name with a staggering respect and affection. You hand the championship trophy to Pienaar, feeling the weight of the polished metal and the warmth from that young Afrikaner's hand. "Thank you for what you have done for our country." And when hearing the reply, "No, Mr. President, thank you for what you have done for our country," you understand that a wound of the past has just been healed by the love of sports and tolerance. You have captured the hearts of those who once feared you most. Your reconciliation lies not only in great events, but it exists in even warm cups of tea. You invite Betsy Verwoerd, widow of the apartheid regime's chief architect, to tea at the residence in the Valley of Mercy. You sit across from the 4-year-old woman, looking at her wrinkled hands and seeing a whole history of prejudice slowly melting away. When she forgets her glasses and stumbles in her speech, you gently prompt her, a polite gesture of a Thembu noble. You visit the monument of Boer war heroes, laying a wreath with all respect. You understand that to build the future, you must embrace even the pains of old enemies. But to reconcile, you know your nation needs to face the truth directly. The TRC was born under the leadership of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. For 2 years, you sat quietly listening to confessions from the radio and television. Gruesome confessions of torture, bombings, souls buried in the dark. You feel your heart tighten hearing of the crimes, but you remain firm on the path of trading truth for amnesty. You believe that restorative justice is the only medicine for a scarred South African body. The Commission had helped us move away from the past to concentrate on the present and the future. You tell yourself as you see repentant tears falling on the hearing room floor. May 1996, you sign South Africa's new constitution. You feel the weight of the pen on the white paper, each stroke a mark crossing out the remnants of injustice. This is the world's most progressive constitution, protecting the rights of every human being, from the poorest to the marginalized LGBTQ+ community. Yet, glory always comes with loneliness. F.W. de Klerk and the National Party leave the government of national unity. You stand alone at the pinnacle of power, looking at the backs of old companions, feeling the rupture of an alliance that has completed its historical mission. Economically, you face a cold reality. A country is exhausted with a vast gap between the rich and the poor. You decide to pivot from leftist policies to the pragmatism of gear. You know old comrades in the trade unions are outraged, calling you a traitor to the Freedom Charter. But you stand firm before the storms of criticism. You understand that without fiscal stability, without investor confidence, the dream of a prosperous life for Black people will remain only empty promises. Internationally, you are a proud, independent diplomat. You grip Fidel Castro's hand. You embrace Muammar Gaddafi, despite the frowns from the West. When questioned, you hold your head high and declare, "The enemies of countries in the West are not our enemies." You use your influence to resolve the Lockerbie case, convincing Gaddafi to hand over suspects. You prove to the world that a prisoner on Robben Island can become the helmsman for global peace. But amidst those brilliant feats, your bedroom remains enveloped in a terrifying silence. The marriage with Winnie has truly been dead for a long time in your mind. You stand before the divorce court in 1996, your voice choking as you utter the most painful words of your life. "Ever since I came back from jail, not once has the defendant entered the bedroom whilst I was awake. I was the loneliest man in the world when I stayed with her." You walk out of the court, feeling the cold of personal freedom even more freezing than the Atlantic sea breeze. 38 years of waiting. 38 years of hope. Finally leaving only a divorce paper and shattered memories. Yet, life still has a gift for you at 80. You find Graça Machel. You feel the warmth from her hand during late afternoons in Johannesburg. You marry on your birthday, a wedding filled with laughter and roses. Graça brings you peace. She personally makes you cups of tea, walks with you in the garden, listening to old stories without judgment. Finally, after a lifetime of storms, you have found a harbor for your soul. In 1999, you made a decision that astonished all of Africa. You refused a second term. You smiled and said, "I don't want a country like ours to be led by an octogenarian." You transferred power to Thabo Mbeki in absolute serenity. You returned to your home in Kunu, building a house identical to the cottage at Victor Verster prison. Because only there, in the familiarity of that structure, could you feel truly at peace. Though retired, you never stop fighting. You realize your biggest mistake was being too late before the HIV/AIDS pandemic? You launched the 46664 campaign, taking your prison number as a new weapon. When your only son, Makatho, passed away from this disease in 2005, you did not choose silence to protect your reputation. You stood before television cameras, voice ringing, "Let us give publicity to HIV/AIDS and not hide it." You used your own family's pain to shatter the stigma of an entire society. You still maintain a strong critical voice against the world's injustices. You vehemently condemned the Iraq War, calling it a visionless act. You founded the Elders, gathering the greatest minds to guard peace for humanity. You are like a great tree still casting shade even when the roots have begun to grow weary. In the final years of your life, your health gradually weakened due to the effects of the years of forced labor. The old tuberculosis returned to haunt every breath. You lie in the hospital room, listening to the steady ticking of the machines, eyes distant, looking out the window. The last time you appeared in public was at the 2010 World Cup. You sat in a small vehicle, waving to 85,000 people at Soccer City. The cheers were still as passionate as in 1995, but now you only had enough strength to smile and wave very gently. You have completed the mission. You have guided the South African ship through the storm. The 5th of December, 2013. At your home in Johannesburg, an absolute silence envelopes the room. You lie there, your breath lightening, slowing. You feel yourself drifting toward the green hills of Transkei, where the Mbashe River still sluggishly flows. You see your father standing and waiting, see your mother reaching out to welcome you. You see the silhouette of Rolilala, the mischievous herd boy of long ago. Our nation has lost its greatest son. Our people have lost a father. Those words ring out across the world's television stations, but you can no longer hear them. You are sinking into a long sleep, a serene sleep, after a 10,000-mile journey. You gently close your eyes. Images of Robben Island, the Pretoria Court, Grace's smile, and the singing of the Rainbow Nation gradually fade into the void. Darkness descends gently, like a warm velvet blanket. You feel the final silence, the silence of a man who has fully fulfilled his promise to history. You slowly relax the hands that once gripped fighting sticks, once held guns, and once signed constitutions of freedom. All pain, all shackles, all burdens have now receded. Only eternal peace remains. You gently dissolve into the night, becoming a part of the stars twinkling in the vast South African sky. Nelson Mandela's journey has now truly closed, but his legacy remains, like a lighthouse shining bright amidst the vast ocean of compassion. You find yourself sitting in the gentle darkness of the house in Kunu, where it all began. The sound of the wind blowing through the rustling green grass fields, the sound of the stream flowing in the distance. All are retelling a story of forgiveness. You look back at your life, from the green hills of Transkei to the cold bars on Robben Island, and realize that true freedom is not breaking the shackles on your hands, but liberating your own soul from the shackles of hatred. The world has now become more peaceful through your eyes. The moonlight outside the window is covering the memories in a thin layer of silver. The feeling is so gentle. You feel your body becoming relaxed, like a cloud drifting lazily across the vast South African sky. No longer the burden of a nation on your shoulders. No longer the pain of separations. Only absolute stillness and the warmth of tolerance remain. You have fulfilled the mission of a great troublemaker, to bring peace to millions of other souls. Let the final images of Madiba's radiant smile lead you into a deep sleep. You take a deep breath of the scent of the motherland and breathe out slowly, feeling the serenity spreading through every cell. All the storms of history have receded into the past. Now, only the gentle night and the eternity of an unbreakable heart remain. I wish you a good night's sleep. A dream of a rainbow nation where love is always stronger than division.